Good morning and welcome to Bloomberg's Smart Cities Innovation and Disruption at the Grid Edge event, part of a series of events we are doing on smart cities. My name is Laura Milan and I'm joining you virtually today. Today we are going to focus on how we store and consume energy and how this is impacting the grid. What new technologies will bring together the consumer, prosumer, and the intelligent grid? How can digitalization enable a new way for energy production, storage, and consumption to work together seamlessly? As new entrants come into the space, what opportunities and challenges lie ahead for traditional power companies? And how will regulation evolve over the coming decades? First of all, a few housekeeping details. So before we begin, I would like to recognize our sponsor for today's event, Siemens. I'd also like to draw your attention to a white paper that Siemens has produced focusing on the grid edge. The paper is called Energy Intelligence, Tapping the Potential of a Smart Energy World. And you will find it within the window called Handouts in the second tab in the Q&A window, where you can download it. I'd now like to welcome our community from across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, and also say hello to the thousands of listeners tuning in through social media and via the Bloomberg terminal. Also, please make sure that you're using Firefox or Chrome to watch this. Refresh your browser if you're having any issues with sound, and you can restore windows using the buttons at the bottom of your screen. And the size of each window is adjustable. Don't forget, you can submit your questions via the box in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, and you can also join the conversation via social media. We would also encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook using the handle @Bloomberg Live or @Business. So let's start with introducing our first panel of speakers. Joining us this morning, we have Javier Cavada, the CEO of Highview Power.
Hello, very good morning and very good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Laura, also joining virtually. Very excited to discuss about all what the technology is bringing to enable these smart cities and this new way of producing, storing, and generating energy.
Great, thanks, Javier. Looking forward to it too. Then we also have Sabine Erlinghagen. She is the CEO of Siemens Smart Infrastructure Digital Grid. Hi, Sabine.
Hi, very warm welcome from my side to everyone. Looking forward to an engaging discussion.
And I'm also delighted to introduce Mark Wilson, the CEO of Eli Group.
Hi, thank you very much. And yes, looking forward to discussing long-term storage and, as Javier said, all the different technologies and how they can all play a part in helping us hit our net zero targets.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. Over the last decade, renewable energy has changed the power game. With more consumers driving electric cars, putting solar panels on the roofs, or businesses prioritizing decarbonization, we have seen a historically centralized power system decentralize. As the amount of wind, solar, and energy increases, the greater the fluctuation in power generation. So the key is to ensure there is a balance between generation and consumption on the power grid at all times. With all these new technologies connecting at the end of the grid, the question is raised of how we can make sure that the process is smarter while minimizing the challenges of cybersecurity and data protection issues. From microgrids to e-mobility to battery storage and the seamless connection to smart buildings, districts, and cities, this panel will discuss the various types of technologies on offer to make the grid smarter while at the same time protecting consumer data. So I would like to start by asking our panelists, what's the latest for smarter grid systems? What opportunities do you see in small microgrids, renewables, energy storage, and so on? Sabine, if you would like to start.
Thanks, Laura, for that question. The grid edge, in our view, is the opportunity to accelerate the energy transition to a pace fast enough to meet our carbon emission targets. That means installing renewables at a very fast pace, at the same time adding storage, and then making the whole thing intelligent enough to keep the grid stable at the same time. So that's huge opportunity, not only for the economy and for the energy transition and the net zero target, but also obviously an interesting business to be in.
That's great. Thanks, Sabine. And Javier, I'd like you to pick that up from Sabine and tell us from your point of view, where are the opportunities? What's the latest?
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. And definitively following on where Sabine has left it, I mean, definitively we are already in the middle of a change. It's not a change that is happening, it's coming. It happened already, and it's getting bigger and bigger. I mean, the amount of electricity and electrons that we are receiving and we are able to generate even at home and even in our apartments in the roof with solar, and also getting contracts with wind generators to enable very clean, very low cost, very intermittent power generated, so which is bringing us an enormous challenge, which is how to balance, how to flatten the curve of generation and make it parallel and making it able to satisfy the demand and the demand that everybody is having at home and every business it's having in the cities. And you said it, a very important point is also reliability and security of supply. So for that reason, energy storage, and I know we're going to be talking about how to store big amounts of energy in a reliable manner to have it exactly when they are needed, on the moment, on the place, at the quality, and with the security. The security of supply is a fundamental question that we must answer since the very beginning of this change.
That's great, and I'd like to take your idea of energy storage to go to Mark now. If you could, you've also mentioned energy storage at the beginning, so maybe you could talk to us about what the opportunities are there.
Yes, so we from 2015 we've seen where energy storage is really going to become vital for the energy system, and just recently, mainly due to COVID, I believe we've all seen a glimpse into the future and what the energy system could look like. On a big positive, we want it to be 100% renewables, which will help us hit our net zero targets. But we had significant increase in balancing costs in August of this year in the UK, and that could have been mitigated against if there was enough new energy storage on the system. I mean, our Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago announced that we want to see 100% renewables on every household powered by offshore wind or renewables by 2030. Now, we believe that is achievable, but you need energy storage alongside that for obvious reasons, for when the wind's not blowing, or if it's for solar, when the sun's not shining. And there's a number of technologies that can help. There's no silver bullet, but combined different technologies working together, we firmly believe that you can achieve these targets.
Javier, I think that you've been the first to mention the challenges of this of grid edge and these new technologies. So why don't you go a bit into it? Tell us what are to you the main challenges of these new systems.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that, Laura. I mean, in overall, I mean, when we look at the title of this discussion and well, the title of our panel and the future of smart cities, I mean, when we look at the smart, we always assume that it needs to be clever, needs to be sustainable, needs to be low cost. I mean, we need to be able to save cost, but needs to be secure. So unsecure means that we need to ensure the resilience, the availability of power at any time, in any condition. That means that the reliability of the generated power needs to be safeguarded. That's what brings in the energy storage. And when we talk about security of supply, we talk about electronics, the cyber threats, the cyber barriers, the cyber security part of it, how to integrate all the different devices, technologies that are already getting connected together. So we're having wind, we're having solar, but all wind and solar are not the same. We have big parks offshore, as Mark was mentioning, being built massively. We have solar in big farms, but we have solar on rooftops. We have, during the COVID-19, I can raise my hand. I've been installing some solar in the garden. So need to not to cut all the grass now. It's a bit better, and I can get some other response. And definitively the challenge is how to match the demand with the generation, how to maximize the use of the excess of generation, so how to dump it again into the grid, how to maximize the value of the renewable electricity that is being generated. And smart electronics and energy storage, those two are the two ponies which have definitely more than one trick each that need to be safeguarded and protected to achieve this new world that we are already in. So we better fix it.
And how about the duration of that storage, Mark? What challenges are you seeing there? What can you tell us about that?
Well, we see there's two different types in very basic terms. There's short-term storage, which is we see as lithium battery, which will play a major role, and then there's long-term storage, which is pump storage hydro, which we are doing. There's compressed air and green hydrogen and others, but those we see as the sort of main players. Short-term storage is sort of 1 to 2 hours, and that plays a role. But if the weather is unpredictable, as we know, or to a point is unpredictable, if there's no wind or sunshine for a period of time of sort of 4 or 5 hours plus, that's really when you need long-term storage like pump storage hydro or compressed air or green hydrogen. So they'll all play a part in working alongside renewables to ensure we hit our net zero. Some people think it's a pipe dream, or some people think it's difficult. We don't. It's something that the government just needs to put the right policies in place to allow these all these sort of technologies to push ahead. And I'm sure I don't know Javier, but I'm sure I can speak for him by saying I know they would have the foot to the floor like we would to get as many projects built as possible.
And one of the issues that often arise when we talk about smart everything, not just energy or grids, but everything nowadays, is that everything is connected. So how do we ensure that the data is protective, that it's safe from a cybersecurity point of view? Sabine, I'd like to ask you that question.
Thank you. I think you're fully right. The challenge of cybersecurity is ever emerging. If we look at the microgrid level, then we start to see everything connected there, from the battery to the storage in the microgrid itself. But then microgrids are rarely islanded. They are typically also connected to the grid and needs communication to the grid. So needs the current status communicated, the capacity, the predictions communicated both ways. So that opens up intrusion possibilities into that very system. At the same time, the grid management and the grid operation will get more connected. So what is currently a server in a room within a grid operator, which is cyber secured by the physical security mostly, and then obviously by patches and stuff like that. But still, the physical room does much of the protection these days. Now that we get into that connected world where the grid operator needs energy, then obviously the points of interaction of that grid management systems get amplified, and hence the security threat rises. So what you need these days is obviously protection concepts. You can also outsource that. We do that, for instance, in Canada with a managed service where we either run the systems for the operators, because scale in the end matters there. You can protect much better if you have the relative scale to it. Then you need a good patch strategy for all of your software. So updating your software against all the vulnerabilities all the time. So an upgradable system becomes an absolute must. Luckily, there's also good compliance regulations out there. If you look at NERC-CIP and the like in the US, and also some of the European legislation is helping guide the way on looking for and informing the operators and the players on where to look for and what concepts are needed.
We've talked about cybersecurity and storage. It all helps ensure something which is really important, which is key to the grid edge, which is the stability of the system. So I would like to pose a question to the three members of the panel. You just can choose who wants to answer first, but what are the main challenges and how do we ensure that the flow of power, that these grids are stable?
If I may start, Laura, and also following what Sabine mentioned and what Mark was mentioning, I believe that in this case I agree to agree. I would like to agree to disagree, but in this case we are all singing more or less the same song. I believe we are all seeing a grid fully connected, getting generation from renewable sources, from wind and solar, and having storage assets, which you could paint them as pump hydro, as small hydro plants everywhere. Can be done with hydro technology, can be done by technology like the Highview power technology. Highview power has developed a technology that is a pump hydro in a box using liquefaction to liquefy air until it reduces the volume and you have your storage in liquid air, and then you gasify again and you get electricity. And then it comes the point that you mentioned, Laura, is the stability of the grid. It's fundamental that the storage is complementing renewable power, not only with power, not only moving the electrons from one time of the day to another time of the day or to another time of the week. It also needs to provide value in those electrons. And those values need to be inertia, synchronous compensation into the grid, voltage support. So all what the thermal power stations have been doing for decades and decades, if you put wind, solar, and you could put short-term batteries, your grid is falling and is getting fully unbalanced. So you need to get mechanical systems, but still connected, rotating masses, generators, and that you can do again with pump hydro in a box, from Highview power, compressor, any source of combustion technology. But if you go to renewable, again, liquid air, compressor, pump storage, and the smartness, the protection around the way that everything is being connected. So in a way, I'm pretty concerned always about the threats of cyber attacks, but I have to say that those threats are not different in 2021, but they were in 2019. They're simply growing the amount of traffic. But we have been having nuclear stations, coal-fired stations, gas stations. That's not going to change. And the good news, the wonderful news, the technology exists. Technology is available. I have really wonderful panel colleagues here. Sabine from Siemens, Mark, you are witnessing it every day. The technology is ready for the challenge and reducing the risk of that being a challenge completely.
Thanks for your answer, Javier. I'd like to go now into our moment or historical moment that we are all living here. So as you can see, this panel is virtual. We're all in our homes or our offices, isolated from each other. There's, as a consequence of the coronavirus pandemic. But over the last few months, we have been seeing how governments across the world have been putting together massive aid packages to help the economies recover from this crisis. And in some regions and some countries, and particularly in Europe, we have been seeing how these aid packages, governments and leaders want them to fulfill a double objective. First of all, help the economy recover, but also help transform this economy to make sure it becomes net zero in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and helps us fight climate change. So I would like to ask you, we've talked about the challenges, which are like maybe more technical. So in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of the stability, storage, but how can we make sure that grid edge, that smart grids are really helping us fulfill the objective of cutting greenhouse gas emissions and fight climate change? Mark, if you want to go first.
Yeah. So again, a lot of people look at this and think it's complicated, and it really isn't. I mean, there's a report coming out from Jacobs this week, which a lot of analysis and states that if there's 40 gigawatts of energy storage brought onto the system, along with all the renewables that's in the pipeline, we're going to hit our targets. Now, that and that's been backed up by National Grid with the future energy scenario. So, I mean, for ourselves in the sector I'm in, there's over 4 gigawatts of pumped storage in the pipeline presently. SSE just got their 1.5 gigawatt project consented on Friday there. So that could all be built and operational by 2030. Now, that leaves still 36 gigawatt, and I'm sure Javier can make a very good dent in that. And then with the other technologies that are out there, green hydrogen's coming on stream. It's the technology is improving. It will be over the coming years, and along with Javier's technology, there really isn't a big. It's a hurdle, but it's a very achievable hurdle for the industry. But what we do need, and this is the key point, and I can only speak for our technology, but I think it's important for all the technologies, is the UK government need to look at policy and look at policy specifically for long-term storage. These projects, for a pump storage project, you're talking several hundred million to construct over a period of time. Now, the positive of that is obviously it creates thousands of jobs, but for investors to commit to that type of investment, there needs to be some long-term price signals. Now, we see that as two simple mechanisms that already exist. One of those is cap and floor, which was put in place for interconnectors. That's why interconnectors are being built and constructed from the UK to Europe. Or the other option is, excuse me, CFDs, a type of CFD, which is similar to used for offshore wind. The whole point of this is to be able to give investors some certainty on a floor price so that they will invest. Very easy for government to put in place, and we are hoping we see that before COP26 next year. So the government can be world leaders in energy storage as well as offshore wind.
Great. And Sabine, from your point of view, from the point of view of Siemens, how do we ensure that these smart systems help us cut greenhouse gas emissions and help slow climate change?
Thanks for that question. I would first like to add on to what Mark was just saying, and because COVID in itself is a huge humanity challenge, but what it has shown, how vividly we can react to a crisis and how fast and courageous we've been acting, and how much that has helped. So if we compare that to the climate challenge, then it should instill in the society and in all of us trust that we can do something about that crisis, and that we can find a reaction and really alter the course of action in a much more radical way than we might have done that in the past. And to me, the grid edge is really one way of doing that really fast. Because of the pandemic, we need to we are rethinking the way we work, the way we travel, the way cities are built. If you think about the pop-up bike lanes, for example, people rethink how they want to live. So more home office, more living out there in spaces with gardens, less denser cities. So all this disruption that is taking place at the moment is a huge chance. It's a chance for taking that momentum that exists in society and using it for the change towards green. And the grid edge is all about that momentum everywhere. So every school, every university, every hospital, every house can do its part in that transition. And everywhere where we talk grid edge, it's actually green. So the question is, if we get a grid edge going, then it will definitely, by definition, almost help the energy transition, because nobody these days would put a diesel generator in their garden for many reasons. Hence, I'm very convinced that the grid edge is really the chance in an accelerated way to achieve that net zero target. It will be much faster, much more socially accepted, and likely also much cheaper than building that large-scale infrastructure. And the challenge then remains is how to incentivize that. And that's where really the lawmakers come in. And we need to now make sure that we have the right economic situations, the right marketplaces, and so forth to encourage that type of investment behavior. Maybe not going in this sense of subsidies, but in economic mechanisms like marketplaces to run those systems long-term viable.
Mm-hmm. You've just mentioned that no one now would put a diesel generator in their garden, and I think we have someone in the panel, Javier, who has just put, you've just mentioned it, some solar panels in your garden. So why don't you tell us about how can we make sure the grid edge stays green, helps us slow climate change, both from your personal experience and obviously from Eli Group's perspective?
I mean, thanks so much for that one. And I was smiling big when, Sabine, you mentioned about the diesel engine. I mean, I have more than 20 years of life in the energy industry, and I confess it. I've been selling diesel engines many years. I mean, having been running the leading engine company in the world from Finland business, which it was a great business, the same as the combined cycle gas turbine has been a great business, but that is the reality. Game over for those kind of technologies. I mean, the COVID-19 indeed, and it has been mentioned in the panel, has changed, but I would say has accelerated. I think Mark mentioned it has taken us a big leapfrog into the future years. So we are really cutting the deadlines finally, because we are used to make them longer. And well, it's a matter of responsibility, it's a matter of sustainability, but it's a matter of price and cost too. So, I mean, there are new technologies, smarter technologies, lower cost technologies. So, I mean, somebody will say, okay, tell me which is the disadvantage. I mean, the only disadvantage is that it's changing the way things have been done in the last decades. And is that a problem? I mean, it definitely is a problem for many big companies who have a lot of inertia, for countries who have been investing in the wrong technology not too many years ago. and that's really a complicated challenge to move from an asset that is going to last you 30 years, and in the 10th year of life, this has happened, this disruption has happened. But I believe everybody is aware that this is not something that came out of the blue. Wind and solar were the lowest cost generating technologies already 5 years ago. I mean, since 2015, solar prices have been going down drastically, wind prices have been going drastically. I could say the excuse of the market not to go full-fledged for wind and solar was that how are you going to solve the storage and the balancing act? Then the lithium-ion batteries came in to become a bridge, to the really long duration technologies that now are being installed and are being executed as we speak. But definitely, I have been having the luxury of living in China many years, living in many places across the world. Nobody's going to build a diesel engine in the backyard anymore, period. So we all have social media to look at what's available.
That's great to hear. Thanks a lot. So I would like to just use the last few seconds actually that we have on this panel to ask one question from the audience, and I will ask it to Mark. We have been talking about what the grid edge will do for businesses, what will do for climate change, but our audience is asking today, what will the grid edge actually do for us? So Mark, if you could talk very briefly about, what can the grid edge do for normal people, for the people listening to us today?
Right. Well, I would say if anyone hasn't seen it, I would watch A Life on Our Planet by Sir David Attenborough. It's just come out a couple of weeks ago, and it's his witness statement on how he sees the future and the near future. And if you've got children, then it's something, and even if you don't, it's something you have to take very seriously, because I'm 46 now, and when my daughter's 40, she's 11, but when she's at my age and she has children, they're going to live in a very different planet from what we have taken for granted if we don't all make changes, and we all can play a part in this. I mean, at some point, we're all going to be shifting to electric cars. We can get storage in our houses as well. But it's the industries and companies like ourselves and Javier that can do stuff at bigger scale as well. It's all very achievable. We can and by doing this as well, and by bringing energy storage onto the system as it was highlighted, it stops the need for a lot of major infrastructure, which can actually save the consumer money. So save you money, but more importantly, save the planet.
That's great. Thanks so much. I would like to thank the audience for joining us today, and also thank Javier, Mark, and Sabine for this great panel discussion. Also for the last reference to David Attenborough, as we're like big fans of him and of his documentaries here. So thanks a lot. And next up, I would like to introduce my colleague, Michael Kennefic from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Laura. How you doing?
All good here, all good. So Michael, we've, as you've just seen, we've been discussing about the big ideas of grid edge and smart grids, new systems, new technologies, but I'd like to put some numbers into it. And I know that you've worked a lot on these issues in the past. So first of all, can you tell us a bit about how will the grid change and how much more grid equipment will be deployed between now and 2050?
Sure. So yes, so my name's Michael Kennefic. I'm an analyst on the decentralized energy team at Bloomberg NEF. So what we look at, I guess, how the grid is going to change. And I want to maybe draw your attention to this slide. So this is the European grid from 2020 to 2030. And I guess what it does show is how the grid's going to become more decarbonized and more decentralized. And I think I might just walk you through this grid and might take this, just looking at the chart on the left. So along the bottom of the chart is the size of the power plant. So on the left hand side would be small scale, something like rooftop PV. for residential homes. And then as we move along up to the right, we kind of larger scale, like nuclear and coal power plants. The color would indicate, I guess, the type of technology. So blue for wind, red for nuclear, for example. And then the size is under the curve, the size of each slice that represents the amount of electricity that technology generates. So this data is built up from Bloomberg NEF's New Energy Outlook, which we produce every year. It's based on a cost optimization model, and we'll be releasing the 2020 version of this over the next in a week or so. But I think what this really goes to highlight, and when you look at the shift from 2020 to 2030, and reinforces, I guess, what all the panelists just said, the grid is going to become more renewable, more solar, more wind, and also be at the smaller scale, so at the grid edge.
How much has been invested so far into these new technologies?
Well, I mean, so looking at I said the most grid edge. So what we're looking at here, so this is, I guess, our estimates of how much will be invested. So cumulative investment in, I guess, on-site solar and on-site battery storage installed on customer sites, and we estimate that this investment will reach about $40 billion by the end of this decade.
So far, how are the companies reacting to these new trends that we have been discussing? What sort of companies are we seeing getting into this space?
No, sure. So it's been quite an interesting space in the last few years. So we track, I guess, in the investments and acquisitions and partnerships as well, that companies are making in the decentralized energy space, or the grid edge space. And on the right-hand side here of this chart, you can see, I guess, the different types of technologies that we'd like to define as decentralized energy. And I think it's pretty clear to see over the last, since 2010, there's been a steady increase in the interest in decentralized energy, and we can see how, I guess, the interest in those technologies change as well. So I think, and maybe just direct your attention to the green stack that we can see, and since 2017 we're seeing an increasing interest in electric vehicle charging, which is, I guess, unsurprising, as the enthusiasm or the direction of travel in terms of electric vehicles has become more clear. I think the other thing to highlight is, you've probably seen as well, so far in 2020 there's been quite a steep drop off in the activity we've tracked. As had been mentioned already today, COVID-19 being a factor in that. But also, I feel a lot of companies are beginning to reach I guess they've built the capabilities they need in this space. And because when we're talking about the companies in this space, so we were tracking about 50 companies or so in their activity, and unsurprisingly, power companies, so your traditional electricity utilities and suppliers, they've been the most active, and that's the like of NG, or EDF, or Eon. You also see diversified in industrials, that's your Siemens and Schneider, also being very active. I think what I'd like to draw everyone's attention to is, I guess, is that the green-blue stack that we see. So this is the oil and gas companies, and this has certainly been led by the European majors as they look to diversify their businesses and transition from being an oil company to being an energy company, as they'd like to describe themselves now.
Mm-hmm. And I think one example that you have highlighted in your research is Shell. With just a couple of minutes, or 1 minute actually, I think, left on the presentation. Could you just tell us? I mean, you've mentioned the effects of COVID, and we're seeing it on the chart. How investment this year has been significantly smaller than in the past. What are we expecting over the longer term?
Sure. So we've seen, as I said, those charts showed a lot of investment in the space from the major energy companies, but we're seeing a trend as well of these energy companies start to, I guess, to partner up with other large financial companies. So we're seeing joint ventures between Carlyle Group and Schneider, between Siemens and Macquarie, and I feel there's definitely a sense, there's a move in it. Definitely COVID has been a speed bump in this. A lot of financial uncertainty, economic uncertainty might obviously impacts on business, but I feel the energy trends are clear. We're seeing, I said, that moving from high to small scale energy resources. The technology is there. In PV, it's storage, on-site generation as well, and clearly the investment is entering the space as well. So while COVID has been an interruption, everything is there to make this business happen, and it's up to these companies now to go and deliver on it.
That's great. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Next, I would like to introduce my colleague and fellow journalist at Green, Akshat Rathi, who joins us from London, and he's going to delve into new entrants, new opportunities, and new threats within the market. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura. Hello and welcome everyone to the second part of this event. Joining us for the next part of this event, we have Tom Chadwick, CEO of GI Energy. We have Greg Jackson, founder and CEO of Octopus Energy, and Sandrine Mubenga, CEO of the D.R.Congo Electricity Regulatory Authority and the president of the STEM DRC initiative. So the revolution has begun. New entrants are coming into the market. Oil and gas companies, the automobile industry, have all started to get involved and have pursued a series of mergers and acquisitions in order to claim a stake on the power grid. But how will the grid edge cope with these new entrants, which also include a vast array of startups, and what opportunities or threats exist on the horizon? In addition, over the next decade, the grid edge market will be defined by regulation. How will this impact new entrants within the space? That will be key to examining the future that is going to be held for traditional power plants. That leads me to my first question, and that's to Greg. Octopus Energy has been a disruptor in this space. What has allowed you to cause that disruption, and how are the other players in the industry adapting to it?
It's a great question. So I think, first of all, the UK regulatory regime allows new entrants in energy retail and kind of enables them to build a decent-sized customer base. Because I think ultimately the energy transition and the kind of challenges you're talking about now are the beginning of an inversion in the energy supply chain. Customers used to be the lucky off-takers for the kind of real action of energy, which might be generation and transmission. But actually, for the renewable revolution, for the decarbonisation of transport, and decarbonisation of heat in many countries. The consumer needs to be at the heart of it. If you've got renewable generations, which are intermittent and depending on the weather and other factors, then you need to be able to change demand in order to match generation, the exact opposite of how it used to be. So I think the thing that's enabled companies like ours to come into the market has been this, certainly in the UK and I think in many other countries, an understanding that retail matters. But actually, I think that's just the beginning of the complete inversion of the supply chain. And the way in which it's going to affect other companies is going to be incumbents are going to have to think about customers. We've got nearly a couple of million households on our books today, and I'm 10 meters away from some of the people that look after our customers. I personally write a lot of the emails that our customers see. And I think if incumbents want to kind of get ready for this new world, they need to be ready for that degree of customer engagement.
Right. And at this point, I'd like to bring in Sandrine. One of the reasons why Greg has been able to pull off what is an impressive feat for a startup to build a base that has now more than 1 million customers already is because the regulatory environment in the UK allows for such competitors to come through. You are now the first CEO of the regulatory authority in the Congo. What do you think the regulatory authority needs to do in the current landscape? And how do you imagine it playing this sort of role in a country where 90% of the people still need electricity?
Well, thank you for the question. The role of the Electricity Regulatory Authority is basically to regulate, license, supervise, and also anything that has to do with the generation, transmission, distribution, import, and export of electricity. So in doing so, basically the regulator ensures that the rights of the customers, the right of the consumers, and the right of the operators are respected. So that's the main goal. And having the regulatory agency really strengthens the legal and regulatory framework, which attract both private and public investment. So that's what the regulator does in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And like you mentioned, in the Congo, 90% of the population does not have access to electricity, even though the Congo has a potential to produce 100,000 megawatts of clean hydropower. So as the regulator, my role is to regulate the electricity market so that we can attract more investors, so that we have more operators, and ultimately we can increase access to electricity that is clean and that doesn't affect negatively the earth.
I'd like to bring you here in, Tom. In the last 15 years, you've been in the market building mini-grids and other applications. Those sorts of applications are going to be crucial for consumers in places like the Congo, where they're going to get access to electricity for the first time, but also in developed markets like North America. What has your experience been like, and why do you think the time for mini-grids has truly come?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for including me on the panel. I think the migration has started to happen more rapidly in the United States for a number of reasons. I think microgrids address issues of resiliency and reliability in a way that the elderly grid here is certainly challenged. And that means that in the end, customers are focused on saving money and also addressing, reliability and resiliency issues. And, the advent of increased weather, climate events, we're seeing, fires on the West Coast in the United States, which are disrupting the grid, and hurricanes in the south and storms in the east which basically mean that the market's much more open to engaging in microgrids. So one thing that has really been a big driver is the cost reduction in terms of the pieces of equipment and the software that ties these assets together, and that's been phenomenal. And particularly the evolution of battery storage, and our company has been the beneficiary of radical drops in price in terms of energy storage. So that's been a big driver. I will say there are a couple of things that still stand in the way, and I have a background in telecom in Europe, and what I've seen there is a much more regulated and standardized approach to these kind of things in Europe on the telecom side, which allowed for a rapid evolution. And I'm still an advocate in the United States that microgrids need to be more regulated, standardized, so that they can actually be integrated into the existing grid, because there's still quite a lot of pushback from the incumbents and the utilities to this. So those would be areas that I'd look to change.
And this would be a good place for Greg to come in and perhaps talk a little bit about how software has played a huge role in helping grid edge technologies to truly become part of the modern era. But also, could you comment on batteries and how they are or might play a role in the technologies that we are going to have to rely on?
And sorry, what phase was that?
Batteries.
Batteries. Thank you. Cool. So first of all, energy very rapidly has to become a technology sector. Take the UK as an example, but the same picture applies in most developed economies. And of course, we can then look for how we build from the ground up better in emerging economies. But the UK energy system used to have, call it 100 power plants and a totally predictable demand curve for consumers. And you could just turn the power plants on and off to meet that predictable demand curve. Where we are today is, if you include rooftop solar and distributed generation, more than 1 million generation points, and increasingly with things like electric vehicles and electric heating, very large shiftable loads in millions of homes. And what that really means is energy is now a big data market. I still think that if we look at the way that grids are often organized, it looks a bit like a mini cab office. There's kind of a bunch of people sitting there with switches, levers, and telephones. And yet, we've moved in transport from mini cabs to Uber, where large amounts of data and algorithms are matching supply and demand continually within very localized markets. And energy now needs to do the same. Batteries are fascinating because, of course, with renewables, the requirement for storage, and indeed the opportunity to make money through storage or to meet customer needs through storage is high. But we still have a world in which, in pretty much every kind of grid system, we've got these artificial markets where the people running the grid are running tenders for where storage may go. You may be doing it at the distribution level. But the reality is what we really need is to expose the prices of electrons, perhaps based on their carbon content, at every stage in the grid. And then investment can flow to the places that need storage. And it can flow from energy suppliers, it can flow from networks, it can flow from third parties and traders, it can flow from generators. But we really need to open it up with enormous amounts of data and price signals. So the investment goes to the place it is needed based upon each company or each participant's proprietary understanding of the opportunity. We have to move away from the world of trying to centrally plan all of this. Otherwise, the change will be far too expensive, will take far too long, and we can't afford that.
Right. So, Sandrine, one of the things that you're hearing in developed markets in the US and in the UK from Tom and Greg is that the use of frontier technologies, say batteries or software, to be able to run the grid are becoming crucial. How is that in the Congo? Are you even exploring those options, or right now the most important part is to get the basics right?
I love your question because you see, I'm in my lab. I do research on battery technology, and what we are doing with battery technologies, as Greg mentioned and Tom earlier, batteries are used for EVs and for the grid. So if you look at the used batteries from EVs, it's going to be a waste management issue. And what we are trying to do is take those used EV batteries and change their functionality so that we make energy storage for grid application. So they become used for stationary application that we can use for mini grid and things like that. So that's what you see we are doing in this lab here. So the battery is at the heart of my research. So of course, thinking about how to use batteries in the Congo is always in my mind, especially because the Congo contains 60% of the world reserve of cobalt, which is used to make lithium-ion battery. And Congo also produces lithium and all the minerals that you need to create that clean technology. So as the regulator for the Democratic Republic of the Congo, currently, 99% of the electricity we generate is hydro, but we also have a microgrid in the Congo, and this is actually one of the preferred ways for rural areas. So yes, we are thinking about batteries, and part of the regulator's duty is to actually develop all those standards that you mentioned, because for those technology, we need to have standards in place so that we can easily integrate all those technology onto the grid. And we have a fantastic opportunity that we are practically setting the place to build the grid from scratch. We have this opportunity in the Congo. So we want to build the grid in a smart way. We want to build a smart grid, and the regulator can help put in place all the technological, legal, and regulatory requirements to do that.
So Tom, I'd like to bring you here because I'd love to know, through your 15 years of working on grid edge technologies, what have you seen from regulators that have been successes for ensuring that these technologies play the kind of role that we hope they can play in the future?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The markets that we operate in are predominantly California and New York. Texas is also a very friendly regulatory environment. But let me kind of refer to a couple of things in New York that I think have been instrumental in progressing the adoption of on-site energy. They introduced the VEDA tariff recently in New York, and the VEDA tariff is essentially a replacement for net metering, and it allows a much more kind of targeted approach towards on-site energy, and encourages people to invest in areas where there is real need, as opposed to just a blanket net metering solution across all geographies. So there are very significant advantages for being in certain areas within New York than others, and this tariff drives people towards that, and it also drives people to certain times of the day. So that's a very significant development. And then the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is CDG, community distributed generation, and that basically allows CNI customers and retail customers to benefit from on-site energy and actually take advantage of the lower cost renewable energy that's become available.
Right.
So those are two of the significant things. There are a raft of other push and pulls that the state has introduced, and one, I just highlight one which I do think is going to be important. It's a stick, but Local Law 97 in New York is basically going to make it possible for buildings from 2023 onwards to be fined if they have emission targets that are exceeded. So again, a very strong punitive directive at the city level, and there's also one at the state.
Right. I'm going to remind our audience that don't forget to keep your questions coming. There's a little Q&A box where you can drop them. I'm going to take one of those questions, and perhaps Greg can take this one. How will the entrance of oil and gas companies into the renewable energy market affect grid edge technologies?
Yeah, so look, for oil and gas companies, they now face the existential threat that the product they've been pulling out of the ground for decades is suddenly looking like it could be in calamitous decline, particularly in transport. And I think that leaves them looking at what's going to be powering transport and indeed the rest of society going forward. But I think the first thing to note is the energy transition means that the demand for electricity globally is going to increase, I don't know what, 5x? I mean, who knows? It's going to be a colossal increase in demand for electricity. So what we're going to see is, like in so many growing markets, there are the opportunity for a wide array of different theses and different business hypotheses to be played out. I think for the oil and gas companies, they're going to have to learn what it is like to look after enormous numbers of customers, rather than having a very transactional relationship, which is what they're used to in their retail sector. In terms of generation, I mean, they've got tremendous assets, but you asked about grid edge. And at grid edge, I think it's fascinating. I talk to oil and gas companies, and they have fantastic technologists, but they're not technologists who are used to thinking about what is intimately happening in someone's home or in their transport. And if we're going to make grid edge technologies work, they've got to work for users. That's the most important thing. So, I wonder if, in the same way as organizations like Accenture started acquiring web agencies a decade ago, because technology was moving from the sort of the server room to the browser, are we going to see oil and gas companies having to get together with FMCG or service providers as well as deep tech companies?
Yeah. And Sandrine, one place where the grid edge can start to play a role with the grid is on electric vehicles. And of course, as you said, the Congo provides a lot of the metals that go into batteries that make electric vehicles a part of the current landscape. But are we seeing any movement in the Congo or just generally across Africa on electric vehicles, and do you think they'll play a part in the near future on the grid?
Yes, there is a movement. Actually, in fact, there are some electric buses, solar buses that are made in Uganda. And so there are places where electric vehicles are already being produced in Africa, even though it's not very popular. We see the beginning of that electrified transportation. And what you have to keep in mind, though, is when we talk about electric vehicle, we need to think about the infrastructure, the charging, how to charge those vehicles. And what the problem is sometimes is that we have issues with the electrical infrastructure itself, the grid. So that's why the electric vehicle is still, it's going to come, but it's going to take a while, because first we need to get the electrification rate higher, basically.
Yeah. And so we're coming to the close of the session, and perhaps I'll ask a final question to Tom. What do you think is the most exciting development that you are waiting for on the grid edge?
Yeah, without a question of doubt, it's battery storage. Battery storage is a game changer in the on-site energy business. And, if you look back at solar PV and how rapidly that went up the adoption curve once you had a a stable or relatively stable regulatory environment, and of course, very, very compelling pricing for the equipment, which is effectively starting to happen in the battery storage market. I mean, and just to throw a kind of number out there, New York is looking to bring in 9 gigawatts of power from the renewable segment, and to date, the battery storage deployment is a fraction of the capacity that would be required to enable that. And so really, if there is going to be a widespread adoption of renewables, it has to be matched by the battery storage. And we're beginning to see the regulatory environment and the pricing environment echoing what happened in solar PV. And that's going to be transformative. And, we want to be at the center of that, as do, thousands of other developers and manufacturers, and it's going to be a very exciting 10 years.
That's great. Well, we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. Thank you to all our speakers for joining us today. We are grateful for your participation and all the perspectives. And to our audience, both within and beyond the Bloomberg community, thanks for joining us. Follow the conversation with @Bloomberg Live on LinkedIn and Twitter, or like us on Facebook. And to learn more about the upcoming events, visit our website, bloomberglive.com. Thank you also to our sponsor, Siemens, and everyone who joined us today. Don't forget, you can watch this on demand. Thank you and stay well.